Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our coverage of the Clone Wars history series with the third year of the war. Now, in our last episode, we took a look at the secret back-channel peace talks being held between Republic and Separatist senators. Today we'll be looking at the Onderonian Civil War, one of the many regional conflicts that make up the larger Clone Wars. Chapter 10, Onderonian Civil War. Onderon was a jungle world located within the inner rim of the galaxy adjacent to the Hapes Consortium. The inner rim is not to be confused with the deep core, which is where Coruscant and many of the more richer worlds are located and isolated from the poverty and violence of the fringes of the galaxy. The inner rim was somewhere midway between the hustle and bustle of civilization and the raw nakedness of wild space, which means it was sort of like a suburbs of the Republic. At the height of the Clone Wars, Onderon found its neighbors Kashyyyk and Umbara under Separatist occupation or liberation, depending on who you ask. And so the world of Onderon was very much on the front lines of the Galactic War. Onderon, like many of its galactic neighbors, was settled a little later in history. Somewhere around 5,200 to 4,600 BBY, the first human settlers arrived on colony ships. They found themselves in a world covered by lush and beautiful jungles, but found out quickly beneath that beauty was an extremely dangerous ecosystem full of apex predators and other terrifying fauna. Onderon had 4 separate moons, and legends say the largest, June, used to orbit the planet so closely that animals would fly between the two celestial bodies. The first settlement on Onderon was just a basic encampment, which soon was surrounded by a fortification due to the dangerous animals that lived in the area. Eventually, that settlement would grow into the planet's capital of Isis. But not all Onderonians would choose to live behind the giant walls of Isis. In 4400 BBY, Sith Lord Freedon Nod conquered the planet and ruled it with an iron fist Sith theocracy. His followers were cultists known as Nodists. The Nodists wanted to impose martial law in the city of Isis, and they basically kicked out all of the criminal elements, or in my opinion, the more free and open-minded people of the city out into the wilderness. Back then, when you were expelled from the walls of Isis, it was more or less considered a death sentence. But somehow these exiles learned how to survive and then flourish in the jungles around Isis. These exiles would eventually be called Beast Riders, for they had even tamed the largest predators and animals in the jungles and used them for transportation, labor, and war. These Beast Riders would eventually come into conflict with the city folk still living in Isis, and for hundreds of years the two sides would skirmish against each other until the Galactic Republic first made contact with the planet in 4002 BBY. The Beast Riders would become recognized as one of the most fearsome groups of warriors in the galaxy, and they even managed to help the planet repel an early Mandalorian crusade. But as the year went on and the Republic brought more peace and stability to the region, the Beast Riders also started returning to the city and socializing and returning back to a normal lifestyle. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Beast Riders' numbers had shrank considerably. Many of them who could not acclimate to life in the cities became criminals and mercenaries. At the beginning of the Separatist Crisis and Clone Wars, Onderon, under the leadership of Monarch Ramses Dendup, stayed neutral. The king was pro-Republic, but at the time the federal government was quite weak, and individual planets still held quite a lot of power, especially because there was no federal military to back up the Republic's mandate. This was one of the core problems the Republic faced on a daily basis. King Dendup actually believed that both sides in the conflict were wrong and inherently full of corrupt political entities. Therefore, he wanted to keep the bloodshed off of his planet. But the Separatists and Count Dooku saw Onderon as an important linchpin power in the region. If Onderon joins the Separatists, then many other Inner Rim planets might also become open to that possibility. This would be a very profitable situation for the Separatists, who have yet to have penetrated that deeply into the core of the galaxy. And so the Separatists began searching for an usurper that they could appoint as a puppet regent, and found Sanjay Rash. Rash quickly overthrew Ramses and put him in jail, and took control of the capital and opened the gates for a Separatist occupation. Once Onderon officially joined the Separatist alliance, several loyalists and supporters of King Dendup escaped into the jungles and started the Onderonian Rebellion. The organization was led by Stella Guerrilla and her brother Saw Gerrera. They took on the traditions of the Beast Riders of old and fled into the jungles surrounding the capital city, where they set up camp, built up supplies, and started preparing for an all-out guerrilla war against the rash regime. Senator Mina Bonteri, who we mentioned in our previous video, was the representative of the planet and a part of the peace faction in the Separatist parliament. She had secretly been assassinated by Count Dooku after she attempted to backchannel with Republic Senator Padme Amidala about a potential peace talk. A year later, Lux Bonteri would return home to Onderon and join the rebellion. He found this motley group of resistance fighters in a terrible state. They had figured out how to survive in the wilderness, but beyond that, they lacked weapons and training to mount a proper insurgency against the well-armed Separatist-backed puppet government. Luckily, Lux Bonteri had a thing with Ahsoka Tano a few episodes back, and so he was able to use his connection with her to plead the rebels' case in front of the Jedi Council. He probably should have left the hot-headed Saw Gerrera out of the holocom call, because more considered Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi were wary of getting involved in such an internal conflict. After all, the local government had officially stated their support for the Separatist Alliance, and this resistance group had no legitimate claim to the throne. The Jedi had to be careful before meddling into what is basically domestic politics. Anakin, however, saw a very clear opportunity for the Republic to gain some more allies and potentially even regain some planets at an extremely low cost. All they needed to provide were some basic guidance and training, so that these smaller resistance movements would become more efficient at fighting against their governments using guerrilla warfare and attacking soft targets. Obi-Wan reminds Anakin that there's a very thin line between the term freedom fighter and terrorist, which is an interesting comment and honestly sheds a lot of light on our own geopolitical system in our world today. Almost every major power in the world invests in foreign internal defense and also aids insurgency opposition groups. This usually involves providing basic supplies and weapons along with trainers and even air support to so-called friendly forces with aligned interests and similar goals. Of course, more often than not, countries end up backing the wrong people. For instance, the CIA was reported to have armed Arab Mujahideen fighters, including Osama bin Laden, during the Afghan-Soviet War in the 1980s. At the time, Osama bin Laden was actually pretty pro-American and happy for their support against the Soviet atheists. And it seems like Obi-Wan Kenobi also understands this very important lesson of arming insurgency groups. Just because they are the enemy of your enemy does not make them good friends. Nonetheless, Anakin's passion and logic prevails. His idea for a low-profile and low-cost training program, which could create headaches for the Separatist government, wins support from the Jedi Council. Mace Windu, who also has a sharp military mind, is open to trying out this new type of warfare and sees Onderon as a good testing ground for training pro-Republic insurgents. Yoda allows the mission to go forward, but wants the Jedi to only observe and train. They are only supposed to be advisors and not combatants. Obi-Wan Kenobi also volunteers to go on the mission to watch what Anakin's doing. The Republic advisors quickly begin drilling and training the Onderon rebels in a specific type of guerrilla warfare. They learn how to take out Separatist destroyer droids as well as how to disable a Separatist armored assault tank. Captain Rex, who's used to drilling shinies, takes the lead and shows the rebels how to most efficiently tackle each combat situation. And the training ends just in time because the Confederacy are on their way to attack the rebel camp, and the Onderonians are able to immediately test out the new tactics they have just learned. They barely are able to survive the battle, and a large part of that has to do with the 3 Jedi and clone soldier that was helping them. In the aftermath of the battle, the rebels have a decision to make: either retreat further back into the jungle and establish a new outpost, or go on the offensive. The rebels choose the latter. They realize that this is not a battle about tactical or even strategic victories. They need to inspire the people to come out and support the rebellion. A lesson that Saw Gerrera has a problem learning now, and also for the rest of his life. And so the rebels enter back into the City of Isis and begin launching a series of guerrilla attacks in the city. They focus on taking out small Confederacy patrols and are able to limit collateral damage, but also maximize their exposure to the people. But it's still quite not enough to encourage the average civilian to join the rebellion. They need to make an even larger scene to show the people that they can defeat this puppet regime. The Jedi advisors by this time have already finished their job, and they return back to the wider war, leaving only Ahsoka Tano behind to observe any further operations. The Onderonian rebels immediately hatch a plan to steal a Separatist tank and use it to attack the power generators that fuel all of the droid armies in the city. A victory here will both be tactically important, but also show just how formidable the Onderonian rebels are. The attack ends up being successful. This greatly worries King Rasha's regime, and he quickly calls for reinforcements from Count Dooku and the Separatist alliance, which results in a super tactical droid who takes over control of the occupying droid army. In order to draw the rebels out into the open, Rash decides to hold a public execution for the former monarch Dendump. The Onderonian rebel leadership are unsure of how to act. Sensing a trap, the more cautious Steela believes that they should wait until King Dendump is brought into public before they attempt to rescue him. While Saw Gerrera, hot-headed as ever, wants to attack the ISIS prison and save Dendump before the event can even happen. Saw manages to infiltrate the prison but is captured immediately and tortured by the super tactical droids. Saw might be brash and a bit stupid, but he sure is brave and doesn't break under interrogation or give up any of the other resistance members. The next day, Saw and Dendump are both paraded out for an execution. Steela and the rebels still launch their rescue attempt, but ultimately are defeated and forced to surrender. But before they can be taken away, General Tandon of the Onderon Royal Guard defects and helps the rebels escape with Dendump. Seeing Saw Gerrera get tortured was enough to convince General Tandon that he was on the wrong side of the conflict. On their way out, the citizens of ISIS start to rise up as well. Although they have won the day, the rebels now have the Separatist army's full and undivided attention. They regroup in the highlands east of ISIS and must now fortify their position against the coming Separatist attack. So far, the Onderonians have been using guerrilla tactics to defeat the Separatist droid army, but now they must prove that they can also win a conventional battle. Unfortunately, the Separatists have a new weapon at their disposal, the HMP droid gunship, and it proves to be extremely difficult for the Onderonians to take down. Not even the Beast Riders stand a chance. So just like the Afghan Mujahideen fighters facing the Soviet Hind assault choppers, the Onderonians needed a shoulder-launch anti-aircraft solution. Luckily, the Jedi knew a sketchy pirate arms dealer named Hondo Inaka, who has just the right tool for the job. The rockets end up arriving just in time for the battle, and the Onderonians manage to hold back and defeat the Separatist attack. Unfortunately, Steel Guerrera, the better half of the Guerreras, is killed in action. Although the Onderonian rebels and Saw Gerrera managed to get a victory here, their celebration is very short-lived because after Order 66, the Empire would reoccupy Onderon, and Saw Gerrera and his rebels would become known as the Partisans, and they would become more and more hardened as the war continues. This is kind of covered in Rogue One. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.